Good evening, everyone. My name is Annie Black, and I'm the Director of Programs and Volunteers, the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum. Thank you for joining us for tonight's History Highlights program, Standing Up for Tejano Rights. I'd like to start by thanking our generous supporter of tonight's program, the Summerlee Foundation. Thank you for helping us bring programs like tonight's to life. I would also like to thank our community partners for tonight, Big Brothers Big Sisters Lone Star, Faith Forward Dallas, Girl Scouts of Northeast Texas, the Jewish Federation of Greater Dallas's Jewish Community Relations Council, Legacy Senior Communities, Refugee Services of Texas, Southwest Jewish Congress, Temple Shalom, and the Family Place. As always, thank you all so much for your support of the museum and our programming. I would also like to extend a special welcome to our museum members, board members, and volunteers who are watching tonight. If you would like to learn more about membership or volunteering, please visit our website, dhhrm.org. We will leave plenty of time for questions during tonight's program, either at the end or as we go along, so please feel free to use the Q&A button located at the bottom of your screen to type out and submit your question at any time. I would now like to turn things over to our presenter tonight, Dr. Charlotte Decoster, the museum's Ackerman Family Director of Education. Charlotte.
Thank you, Annie. Welcome. Good evening, everyone. I am very honored to get to kick off Hispanic Heritage Month with this very important talk about standing up for Tejano rights. It's a topic that I'm very passionate about. It highlights some amazing Tejano Upstanders that we have in our exhibition. And I think it's oftentimes a topic that is overlooked within the wider context of Hispanic history and Hispanic heritage. So I'm going to kick it off, and I, as always, hope that technology is on my side. Actually, I'm going to make sure I shared with sound because I have some sound clips for y'all today too. And I want to kick off today with a little bit of a quick recap of history. And when I wanted to do it through maps, I actually went back through my presentation today and looked at what the best way to kind of kick off is, because Tejano history, Tejano civil rights, that conversation really starts really back at the beginning of the land that Texas today resides on. We can, talk about these great civilizations, American Indian civilizations from the 1500s to the 1700s, which is that first map there in the top left corner, that are the native people that live here and have these amazing cultures. And that's going to impact the conversation. It is going to be the Spanish that are going to make contact with the American Indians, different tribes and nations. The Karankawas are going to be the first one who are going to make contact with the Spanish. And that really sets off the narrative here, because this brings Spanish influence to what is going to be the concept of what eventually the identity, what we call Tejano today. And so with that, we see the establishment of the Spanish missions and an attempt to colonize this wild territory, as it is considered by the Spanish, of Tejas. And you can see on that second map here, I put the Spanish flag on here, of what falls under Texas at that point. After the Mexican Revolution, of course, that is going to become, Tejas is going to become part of the state of Texas under Mexican governance. And it's under this time period that we're actually going to see the Anglo-Protestant settlement of Texas happening as well. The reason for that is because Mexico splits the territory of Tejas up in land grants. And these land grants are given to these Anglo-Protestant settlers who are coming from the United States and are trying to find land to build more plantations on, cotton plantations on, ranches on, especially in that area. That is going to be where those missions are, where areas where the Karankawas, the Apaches are going to be living. So now we get this mix of American Indian culture, Spanish Mexican culture, and Anglo-Protestant culture, this melting pot coming all together, especially in what is today that Houston, Galveston Bay area, with the early land grants that are going to be given to the Austin colony and other colonies following after that. That's what you can see on that third map right there, especially in that kind of grayish blue and that blue area right there, which is going to be much of the Galveston, Houston Bay. Then, of course, those Anglo-Protestant settlers, and that's just where we're going to kick it off a little bit in history today, are going to revolt against the Mexican government. They're going to overthrow Santa Anna, its leader, and that is going to lead to the independent Republic of Texas, which is really an Anglo-Protestant republic with that as well. And so here really the conversation starts about Tejano rights. How does this Spanish-speaking, originally Spanish and Mexican population, how do they now fit in this new republic? What is their status? Are they citizens? Have they rights? How do these rights evolve? So this is where that conversation really starts with that map right here on the bottom left corner, where you can see. Eventually, Texas in 1845 is going to be incorporated into the United States. And now the conversation shifts from how do these rights fit within the US Constitution? What does it mean to be Tejano in the United States? And that conversation goes all the way from 1845, where you can still see surrounding around Texas. That's not even the map of Texas in 1845 that it will eventually be. And you can see there's no Oklahoma, there's no neighboring states yet for New Mexico, Colorado, but that conversation continues all the way to today, is that development of the concept of Tejano rights, those people who stand up for it, and those people who also try to remove these basic concepts that we have in our Constitution of our civil and human rights. Again, as Amy mentioned earlier in introduction, as I'm going along, if you have questions, if you want to introduce something else, maybe some knowledge that you have yourself, please feel free to use that Q&A button. I'm actually going to make sure I have that Q&A popped up in front of me. So if you have any questions as we're going, please feel free or topics you want to bring up, please feel free to write that out in that Q&A and I'll see them pop up in front of me. So Tejano, I get a lot of times people ask, I'm familiar with the terms and identities of Latino, Latinx, Hispanic, Mexican American, but I've never really heard of Tejano, or I might have heard about it, but I don't really know what that means. There's quite a bit of range of definitions out there for what Tejano means, but Tejano is a person of Spanish or Mexican descent living in Texas. So it's very similar to Hispanic description. Originally, that Tejano is really indicated to the original people who remain in Texas once the Texas Revolution happens, and those people who do not move to Mexico once Texas becomes an independent republic, and the families that are descendant of that. Over time, that definition has widened, though, to people who for generations or multiple generations have lived in Texas that are of Spanish, of Mexican descent. Also, that term Tejano is also used for the wide culture that comes behind it, a culture known for its music, especially that blends Mexican and Spanish traditions with actually Czech and German influences. A lot of people don't know that it's a combination of those two. Really deriving from that center of Texas and the South, from kind of the Southwest, all the way from El Paso through Lubbock, up through the valleys into Fredericksburg, all the way coming into Austin, is where we're going to see a very thriving Tejano culture and still today as well. And I added some pictures in there from the ballet folkloricos that we have throughout our state to these amazing Tejano folklorica music and bands that we have. And of course, the Tejana superstar is Selena as well, which you might be more familiar with too, because she's so widely known. But just to give you an idea what the importance is of Tejano history and in the state of Texas and in general within Hispanic heritage is that the Texas State Historical Society has a handbook of Texas history, where they have subdivisions of these different handbooks. And one of these is the Handbook of Tejano History. And so after this, I really encourage you, just Google Handbook of Tejano History, and it will take you to the Texas State Historical Association and that handbook. And there's so much more you can learn there about Tejano history, the culture, everything. It's actually an amazing resource to have available. And again, if you have questions as we're going through, please feel free to drop in the Q&A. If you want to add something to the conversation, I can read it out as well if you put that in that Q&A. So as promised, I want to start with 1836 and technically Texas independence, where Texas becomes a republic. It is during this time that Texas declares its independence from Mexico. Just like the United States did from Britain, Texas is going to declare its independence by writing a Declaration of Independence. And this declaration is going to contain some of those same exact principles that the Declaration of Independence for the United States has. Concepts of the right to bear right to bear arms, trial by jury, property rights, some basic political principles of democracy. Really, this was to stand against a concept that Santa Anna was becoming a dictator and was ruling Mexico as a dictatorship. And this declaration is written in English, including the laws and the Constitution of the Republic of Texas were predominantly in English. Actually, only 2 of its authors spoke Spanish. Of the 59 men who signed the Texas Declaration of Independence from Mexico, only 3 were Hispanic. And of those 3 Hispanics, only 2 were Tejano. There was only 2 men that were Tejano men that were that signed that Declaration of Independence, and that is going to have a lasting impact on Texas history and the connection to Tejano rights with that. So I wanted to kick off with that to kind of give you an idea as Texas goes through these different political rules once it becomes a republic. And we are switching to an Anglo-Protestant leadership, we're going to see that the discussion of rights for Tejanos is going to immediately get limited with that, because there's very little voice that stands up for those Tejano rights. So 1848, this is when Texas is going to join the United States, and a Texas convention is written up for Texas to join in statehood. There was a lot of debate. Again, there is only one Tejano who is going to be involved in the writing of this Constitution, and it falls on the shoulders of this one person to make sure that Tejano rights are included in it, especially the fact that Tejanos are going to be recognized as U.S. citizens and that they will have voting rights. So you can see already in 1848, some of these basic rights for Tejanos are discussed right off the bat as Texas enters as state in the United States. And one of those upstanders very involved in this process from the Texas Revolution to the Declaration of Independence, through the writing of the basic Constitution of Texas, to the Convention of Texas joining as a state to the United States. A lot of this is going to fall on the shoulders of Jose Antonio Navarro. And if you live in Texas, you probably have heard of Navarro County, Navarro College. You probably are not unfamiliar with this name. He is is considered one of the founding fathers of our amazing state. And he really plays a major role in all of this. Originally, and he is a true Tejano, originally from San Antonio de Bexar, Jose Antonio Navarro was one of the leaders of the Texas Revolution. He signed a Declaration of Independence, remember, one of those two Tejanos that signed it. And upon his election, he was to the Texas Congress, he really focused all of his efforts on protecting Tejano rights in that Constitution. And that was really important at the founding of this republic, especially since this Anglo-Protestant driven revolution had fought against a Mexican army. Santa Anna considered a Mexican dictator. Tejanos were kind of held in contempt. Anybody Spanish speaking was seen as Mexican and was really almost considered an outcast after the Texas Revolution. And so this was a big role to fulfill and a very important role for Navarro to fulfill. After the convention and him fighting some for those voting rights and property recognition rights as well for Tejanos, which was really important so that they wouldn't lose all of their land. He joined the Santa Fe expedition, which was an attempt to reconnect with Mexico and start some peace negotiations that would establish some recognition of the Republic of Texas. Unfortunately, Navarro was captured during this time, was imprisoned. He eventually escaped after 4 years and returned to Texas. And it is at this point that he joins the delegation that will draft the Convention of 1848, in which Texas will join the United States as one of its states. And again, this whole work that he has laid with the Constitution repeats itself. Property rights, voting rights, recognition as citizens for Tejanos becomes very important. I'm seeing also some messages come in the chat. Somebody said, I had no idea that the great majority of authors, signers of the Declaration of Independence, Texas Declaration of Independence and Convention were not Hispanic, that this reflect a demographic of Hispanic people living during this time when it was signed. Great question. Actually, it was a shifting balance. Before the Texas Revolution, no, the Tejano population was much larger than the Anglo-Saxon population at this point as well. But after the defeat of the Mexican army, some of that population will move out of what is considered Tejas territory. And so it shifts the balance a little bit, but yeah, still a large majority is at this point Hispanic. Still American Indian too, let's not forget that, another population that we don't have time to discuss today, but is part of this conversation as well. Yeah, we oftentimes don't think that. Yes, Tejanos in this case are another question that's going to come in. Are Tejano, are Hispanics in the sense going to have voting rights before African Americans? That is a yes or no question. And we're going to kind of come through that. That voting rights concept is going to change for Tejanos and Hispanics and Mexican Americans living in Texas and the United States as we go. So that kind of shifts back and forward. Thank you. Some great questions. So I might not be able to answer all of them as we go, but some great questions. Okay, just want to add a little bit of context in here as I'm going along and highlighting some of these amazing upstanders that stand up for rights. And this is 1848 and is the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Really important in all of this. This ends the Mexican-American War in 1848, in which part of America's annexation of Texas and interest this expansion that the U.S. is seeking, that westward expansion, is basically going to be sealed in a sense, and we're going to see that expansion happen after this treaty. This treaty ends a 2-year-long war and expanded the United States, and making the Rio Grande the border between the United States and Mexico. And of course, the result of that is not just in Texas, but in areas of New Mexico, and you can see Texas is still shaped a little bit different at this point, but also in California, all of that territory right there. There's going to be quite a bit of Mexican citizens living in this area who now are going to be in U.S. territory instead of Mexican territory. And so many of them are going to move southwards and go into Mexico, but a vast majority remains in what now becomes U.S. territory, and that is about 77,000. So somebody just asked me, just to have an idea in this, we're not talking about nobody. And 77,000, this is not today, the Texas that it is today, and this territory it is today. That's a very large number, a significant number that remains in this area that are now going to have the opportunity to become U.S. citizens. And that is a big shift as well. Somebody asked, I may be wrong, but I believe the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo also categorized Hispanic people to be classified as white for their race. Yes, it actually does. And that is going to be, in a sense, a really sensitive topic when we talk about Tejano identity. It's going to come up again because it's actually going to cause quite a little bit of civil rights issue, this racial classification for Hispanics and Tejanos. So keep that in mind, Sierra. Great question. Okay. Fast forward. I know this is a giant jump in history, and that's because I only have about 45 minutes to cover all of this. We don't have a whole semester college course to deep dive in it, which really is what this topic deserves. So we're going to make a jump forward, and we're going to get to a little bit after the turn of the century, 1910, 1920s. And so during this time period, the Texas government is, and this Texas state government is faced with quite a bit of violence on the Mexican Texas border. We have some major big figures that are going to come in and out of Mexico across the Texas border and target some of the population. This instigate in what becomes known as La Matanza, or known as the slaughter. And this was a period of anti-Mexican violence in Texas that included lynching and massacres. And you can see one of the famous pictures here of the three rangers who are basically tying down Mexican Americans at this point. So under the guise of these few bandits, and we're talking a few here, the Texas Rangers are really going to declare this war against the bandits. And under that guise, they are really not focusing on these bandits, but they are going to attack, harass, kill, lynch, hundreds to thousands. We don't know the exact numbers, but when I say hundreds, we mean over 1,000, but how many thousands, we don't know exactly the numbers, because a lot of people were afraid to speak out against the Rangers. And they're going to mainly target new Mexican Americans that are settled in the area, or Tejanos, especially Tejanos that own property, that had some influence in the community. Are going to be part of this as well. And so while the original task is to stop these bandits, and somebody just asked, did Woodrow Wilson send some army troops to attack as well? Yeah, there are going to be some troops that are going to be focusing on Mexico and some of these bandits as well, but the Rangers are really going to focus on the local population here. They're really going to target that. And it's not just going to be these bandits, they're just using that as a guise. So a very different kind of conversation that we're having here. In it came to the point that the Rangers in a local Hispanic Tejano community became known as Los Diablos Tejanos, or the Devil Texans. And that is really important to understand. This was an extremely dangerous time. Tejanos that had been there for generations were living in fear, were leaving their property, were fleeing. That's how dangerous these border areas all the way into close to San Antonio, that this impacted Tejanos living in this area. Not a great mark on Texas Ranger history here. But this does get me to talk about one of my favorite upstanders, Jovita Idar. And all the kids that come through the museum, if I'm in the galleries, they got to come listen. I take them over to Idar's picture, and I always love to talk about the kids, because a lot of kids don't know her. A lot of adults don't know her. And so I love to talk about her because she really embodies this first big figure in Tejano civil rights, but also in Hispanic and Mexican American civil rights. She's going to be that big figure, that voice that is going to drive a lot of change. And we're going to now see that kind of civil rights movement kick off. That doesn't mean that there's nobody before her, but she is really going to be that figurehead that's going to push everything forward and address some of this. So Idar is born in Laredo, Texas. She's actually comes from a long family of journalists. Her father had his own printing press and printing a local newspaper, but she doesn't start her career that way. Interesting, her family pushed her into education, and she became a school teacher. And this is really where, for her social justice drive became stronger and stronger. Having that background as a journalist family, but then also being a school teacher in segregated schools in actually a very small town in Texas, where she realized that her students, I'm like, there's no, she talked about them not having desks, or that they're at most in schoolrooms and frequently have walls, horrible conditions. And we know in the south of Texas, that is, when we're thinking around the turn of the century, that's pretty hot at this point. And so so she starts there, but then she actually quits that job, and she starts working for her father. And this is how she starts writing. She then, during the Mexican Revolution, also works a little bit as a nurse, helps with the White Cross, and then returns to Texas and starts writing for other businesses as well, other printing presses as well. And she becomes an outspoken critic of the Texas Rangers. And remember, this is during the same time period as La Matanza, right? So this is now overlapping, and Idar is speaking out of what is happening, the attacks on Tejanos, but also social injustices, the poverty around for Hispanic women, Tejano women, that there's not education, there's not enough materials for children to learn, and that there's no tools out there. And so she is bringing out all of these social injustices and writing about this nonstop. And of course, that is not appreciated both by the Texas government and eventually also the US government, who is starting to keep an eye on Idar as well and the writings. Eventually, the Rangers are going to show up at the printing press. And this is where the famous scene, you might have seen some, it's in the PBS video as well. There's several of these recreated scenes, of course, because there was no video back then filming this in South Texas at this point. But the story goes that she famously stands in front of the Texas Rangers and in front of the printing press and refuses to let them in. And declares that her constitutional rights, freedom of the press, freedom of speech, and that they cannot come in because she has the constitutional right as a US citizen, and that she has those protections. And so does the press behind her. And they actually turn away and they go away. So her stance is very significant. within that. Unfortunately, they do come back in the middle of the night. They destroy the printing press, but just like Adar, this does not stop her. She will continue on a career of writing. Eventually, she'll move to San Antonio. She gets married. She opens up daycare facilities for children. So this road of this social justice warrior that she becomes goes from the classroom to the community, journalism in so many ways. And that just makes her one of those great upstanders that we should recognize. Great question. Somebody asked just when Jovita Adar is born. I know it's in the late 1800s with that as well. So I'm going to ask, I was just going to ask my backup here if they knew, and they already looked it up for me. She was born in 1885. Thank you, Annie. I appreciate you doing that. I am not great with dates. So with that. Somebody mentioned that's so interesting. I didn't even know about Idar. Started this movement regarding Tejano social injustice. Where would I be able to learn about her? Just Google her name and you'll learn so much. Just Google PBS video and Idar, and this great, I have it linked here as well. But unfortunately, I can't share that link. I'll see if I can at the end go back to it and maybe share the link in the chat with all of you as well. This great PBS video. But yeah, just start Googling again that Tejano handbook. Just Google Tejano handbook. You'll find a lot about Idar there as well. Sorry, I'm really quickly going through some of this. Hannah asked, what did she teach at school? I think she was just general education and English with that as well. And did it transfer over to her later contributions? I think the two overlap, right? As being an educator and a journalist, that writing talent overlapped as well. And just so everybody's aware, Annie is sharing that PBS video in the chat for you as well, if you want to find that too. Okay, thank you for all of your amazing questions. Makes it more interesting that I know that there's folks on the other side. Ivan is asking a great question about the Treaty of Hidalgo. Ivan, I'm going to point you to maybe doing some research on your own. I am not very familiar with all the complex parts of the Treaty of Hidalgo and fear and signing for Mexico as well. So I know I probably should know all of those little details, but I'm going to go point you to research a little bit more online. Okay. My next one, also connected to La Matanza, and also an upstander that normally is not recognized, and that is José Tomás Canales. And Canales is a really interesting figure within Texas history just overall. He's a politician, he's an author, he's a historian, he is a civil rights activist, he's like all of that combined, like Idar is all these different things combined, so is Canales. In 1905, Canales was appointed to the Texas House of Representatives. He was the only Hispanic member, the only Tejano on the House of Representatives. And by the way, Canales came from a family, one of the oldest land-owning Tejano families and one of the largest land-owning Tejano families in Texas. So a very influential, a very recognized family. And that probably helped him gain that seat. So it was not easy for Hispanics, for Tejanos to get some representation for them in the state of Texas. And this was really crucial, him having this seat and this political influence, because it allowed him in 1918 to really stand up and speak out against that La Matanza, that what the Texas Rangers were doing in the throughout the Rio Grande Valley in the South. he really became, in a sense, a political activist in this, bringing this to the forefront, bringing this to the House, and bringing this up. And I'm going to talk about how he did that in a second. But the result of this is that he actually has to eventually leave the political realm of his career. He will step back from that because he received so many life threats against him, and that made him decide to not seek re-election, which is understandable as well. And instead, it, in a sense, made him even a stronger civil rights advocate because it allowed him to turn his attention fully to civil rights and the expansion of those civil rights. He was part of the original founders of the, these, when we think these key Hispanic Tejano civil rights organizations, the Sons of America, but also LULAC, the League of Latin Americans, the League of Latin American Citizens. He's going to become the first president. And so him not seeking that re-election, in a sense, allows him to focus his attention on something else and bring a much needed cohesion to the fight for civil rights for Hispanics, not just in Texas, but all of the US. But he's going to be the driving force definitely in Texas. And I just want to make a note there how key important this is. All of these Texas upstanders, these Tejano upstanders that we're talking about, this is going to impact all of the United States because the League of Latin American Citizens, this is not just, it's going to get founded in Texas. It's, the spring of the Hispanic civil rights movement is going to come out of Texas, but it's going to spread throughout the United States. Right? When we think more of California and Cesar Chavez, that is going to be later. This is going to be that early founding. And we're going to see a lot of that is going to be coming out of Texas. Actually, we're going to talk about LULAC here in a little bit, which is going to be founded in Corpus Christi. But most importantly, I think at the end of his career too, he becomes this very influential writer where he starts writing about Tejano history, Tejano culture, and then broader Mexican American culture and history into the US as well. And his goal in this was to gap the bridges between this kind of Anglo-Saxon Protestant identity in Texas and the Tejano Mexican American identity. So again, very interesting as well. And so I wanted to share a little bit. This is actually a letter, part of his writing when Canales started his investigation into the Texas Rangers. This is read by an actor. We do not have his original voice.
I was born and raised on a ranch, and am thoroughly acquainted with the ranger business. The ranch had been a haven for the rangers. They stayed there, were stationed there, came there at all hours, got our horses, got meals there, and they got our services. I have known among the ranger forces some of the noblest and best men that I know. Captain Hughes, Captain Rogers, who is now United States Marshal, Captain Wright, who used to be sergeant under Captain Hughes, and various other individuals. At that time, they gave us protection. They were a capable set of men. It did not need any restriction because their own conscience was a self-restraint and law. The charges hereinafter made are not prompted by malice or any improper motive on my part, but for the purpose of enabling the committee to investigate the abuses permitted in the present Ranger force in various sections of the state.
I just love this little, although it's read by an actor, I love this part because, you can hear that strength in, making sure that people understand that there are good Texas Rangers. He's worked with them. He understands the Texas Rangers. But the vast majority are not. And we need to recognize that. We need to drive some change. And this is going to result in 1919 in the Canales investigation. You just see how powerful, his voice is, that this is named after him. It is a legislative hearing into investigating the criminal conduct of the Texas Rangers during that period of Matanza. And also to investigate if the Texas Rangers should continue as a force within within Texas. And this is also where we start shifting from this concept that the Texas Rangers are a militia, or should they become a law enforcement unit, which are two different entities as well. And so we're going to see that shift happening with this as well. So the investigation is really important. It is really going to show what Canales is really able to show with it is the wrongdoing, is these lynchings, these murders that are happening, these intimidations of Tejano population, of landowners, and various degrees with that. They're going to bring a very clear case of murder in this as well. And what is really important is that the committee is going to absolve the Texas Rangers. But, and this is where I think Canales knew this. I think he was very aware that, that probably the Texas Rangers weren't going to go away. And I think that's clear in his previous audio clip that he is aware of that, right? The power that they are. And that they're probably in some form going to get away with this. But what the big thing is that he's able to do with that is that the committee and investigation recognizes a track record of abuse. And this is really going to spark that change within the Texas Rangers of moving towards law enforcement, putting them under some regulation, and it's going to change quite a bit. It's not going to make everything perfect, but Canales knew that it took these little steps with a really big voice and some daring attempts, putting his life at risk to make this possible. And this investigation took more than a year as well. So Annalisa asked that. Thank you. So, and now the ball is rolling, right? We have these two amazing upstanders that really kick off these questions about social justice. And that transforms from social justice in how are we now going to protect our rights as Texans and as Tejanos. And I think this concept starts blending, right? This concept of being Texan and Tejano, this combined identity. How do we protect both sides? And so in 1929, we're going to see the formation of LULAC, the first nationwide Hispanic civil rights organization, one of the largest Hispanic civil rights organizations, one of the largest civil rights organizations still today. You can find more information on their own website for that. This is actually the picture of the founding convention committee right here in Corpus Christi. I love showing that picture. It just shows that driving force behind them. We also see another one, the American GI Forum, which is founded in Texas to protect veterans' rights, Mexican American veterans' rights, by another amazing Tejano upstander as well. Actually, we had his daughter come speak about him last year, if you joined our presentation last year. And this is really important because this is 48. The World War II has just ended. Hispanics have fought in World War II. We've had riots on the West Coast about this, and this whole conversations about Hispanics during World War II. And then this myth has seeped in that Hispanics didn't fight during World War II, that they were not part of this, that they didn't do their duty as US citizens. And that seeps over after the war. And one of those figures that's really aware about this is Héctor P. Garcia. And Garcia, who himself is a veteran as well, he was in the medical corps during World War II. He opened up a medical practice after the war, serving his community, a very poor community around him in Corpus Christi, a Tejano Mexican-American community that really needed his aid as a medical doctor. But he shifts from this medical practice into Tejano rights and protecting them, especially when it comes to veterans. I think for him is recognizing that veterans, Tejano Mexican-American veterans need health protection. They need protection by the VA, just like other veterans do as well. And that is just not happening, and to stand up for those rights. And so he founds with another group of veterans the American GI Forum, which becomes a Mexican-American veterans' rights organization, one of the largest veterans' rights organizations still today. I think one of the big cases that always sticks in my mind, it's one of those big ones, is when Felix Longoria dies in battle, and his family is not allowed to bury him. And it is Garcia and the Forum who step in. They actually recruit the help of LBJ, not President LBJ yet. This is going to be young senator at this point, who is then going to arrange the burial of Longoria in the Arlington National Cemetery. And this action right there, them speaking out this long voice is going to propel them to the national forefront. And this is going to really drive, again, it's going to strengthen all of these other civil rights organizations as well. And just think, right, on this scale, we're talking here Tejanos, we're talking here Texas, and standing up for this young Tejano man who's a veteran, who's not allowed to be buried here in Texas, who now this becomes on a national scale, and we're talking Mexican American rights at this point, Hispanic rights. But think on the impact of these other Hispanic, Latin civil rights organizations. Think on the impact on African American civil rights organizations. All of this is interconnected with that. And that is really important to recognize, is the driving force that these upstanders represent that we need to recognize. So a little bit from Garcia.
In 1947, 48, when I got back from the World War II services, and I came back and came to Corpus Christi and found out that there was a great amount of discrimination against the Mexican American people. The American GI Forum didn't start as a civil rights organization. We started as a veterans family organization. Our main objective at that time was we found out that we want to help the veterans get to the hospitals. Well, then we started working on the education of the veterans. When you realized in 1946, when World War II was over, the average education level of the Mexican-American veteran was less than 2 years of schooling. So then we thought we had to do something about it, so we started working what you called at that time basic educational classes, to set up schools to help the veteran go to first and second, third, and fourth grade, and also get some money for going to school. It was at this time that I started finding out again how uneducated, how lack of opportunity of education the Mexican Americans had.
Again, right, I think a lot of this is awareness about his community, being part of this community, and understanding that he needs to stand up for this. Something needs to be done, and being willing to be that driving force in it, that change maker, right? That makes him that true upstander. Approximately the same time is where we're going to see some of the big Supreme Court cases come up, and some of those court cases that I think somebody asked earlier, that question of are Hispanics being considered white? And this is where that conversation is going to start seeping in. The first one is Delgado versus Bastrop. This happens through the Texas court system, ruled that Mexican American students could not be separated from white students in the public school. At this point in 1948, and it's going to last a while, this is not, Delgado versus Bastrop is not going to stop this right away, but it does kick off this whole series of very important civil rights cases that follows after that. Is that at this point, sorry, I interrupted myself here, children from Hispanic families were sent to segregated, or which were considered Mexican schools. Actually, I love this photo. It's one of the photos that I wish we would have had in the exhibit as well, but this is a photo. Can you recognize the gentleman in the middle? He is not Hispanic, very, very famous. And he's teaching at one of these Mexican, he started his career, his as a very young man, right out of school, started his career teaching at one of these segregated Mexican schools. And this moment right here that you see in this photo will set his whole path to become this amazing civil rights politician. And that was really going to focus a lot of his career around this. Eventually will be the signer of the Civil Rights Act. This is President Johnson right here. Not President Johnson right here. This is school teacher Johnson at this point still, but this is an example of, this is an issue. Johnson recognized it. Garcia is recognizing people are starting to speak out by 1948 about this. And that's what Delgado versus Bastrop really represents is, and that in the court system is being said that this is wrong. Remember, this decision precedes Brown v. Board. There's no conversation about that yet. By 6 years, and this is going to kick off a 10-year legal civil rights struggle by LULAC and GI Forum and other Hispanic civil rights organizations for equal rights. A little bit later, just 6 years later, Hernandez versus Texas, another really important case in this whole conversation. Pete Hernandez was accused and sentenced to life in prison by a white jury. Now, you're going to say, well, Hispanics were considered all white, so that would still be a jury of his peers. And this is exactly what this court case in Hernandez versus Texas starts arguing is, yes, they are white, but there is this two-class theory right here, and you cannot, based on, in a sense, Mexican-American ethnicity and language discriminate in the legal court system, especially in a jury of your peers. This goes all the way to the Supreme Court. It becomes probably one of the key Supreme Court decisions, civil rights decisions. Again, we usually think Brown v. Board, but this is one of those early ones that starts that conversation about civil rights and a conversation about race and identity within the court system. And it is really, really important. The sad part in this all is that this is not going to help Hernandez very much. We actually don't know really much what happens to Hernandez in the end. And it's going to have a sad ending for one of the upstanders in this conversation as well. And that is Gus Garcia. And Gus Garcia is tied to both of these court cases. He is going to be he's going to be the lead attorney on these. Gus Garcia, a veteran himself, stationed during World War II in Japan. What a lot of people don't know, Garcia is also one of, there at the founding of the United Nations. He's on the legal team there as well. So, his international legal expertise is immense. Garcia is a Tejano. He's a Texan, comes back here, and this is where he connects with LULAC, with the American GI Forum, and this is where he becomes one of the great civil rights lawyers of his time. He is going to file for multiple lawsuits that are really going to open that discussion about a Mexican-American, at this point, legally defined Hispanic civil rights, what that means within the education system and within the court system, all the way to the Supreme Court. Delgado versus Bastrop, Hernandez versus Texas, and I forgot to advertise those in my PowerPoint. I just saw that. But when we get to Hernandez versus Texas, this is the first time ever when Garcia is laying out his defense of Hernandez and laying out his case that the Supreme Court gives somebody extra time because the court recognized how important this moment is and how great of an orator and how great of a case that Garcia was pleading, that they give him extra time. And we are talking here the top Turgot Marshall are in this room. We're talking top civil rights attorneys are here, are deciding on this. This is a huge moment in civil rights. And Garcia, unfortunately, fades a little bit out of history. Only in recent years has his name become more prominent. If you've not heard about him, I encourage you to go research his name, look him up. But Garcia, unfortunately, suffered from mental illness. Probably what we consider post-traumatic syndrome from the war still, different things. And that led him to abandon his family and his law practice. And because he couldn't take care of it. And eventually he died anonymously on the streets of San Antonio. It's a extremely sad ending to this amazing civil rights case, but I think what we can recognize here is the passion and the drive that Garcia had through all of this. Not only did he stand up for Hernandez in this moment and recognize the importance of what this meant for Hispanic civil rights, but he cared about Hernandez all the way through, even to the point after the case that he wrote to the parole board trying to protect Hernandez. And this is a letter read by an actor that Garcia wrote to the parole board. And listen very carefully how he is pleading for Hernandez. And again, this is after the court trial. He doesn't have to do this.
This is from a letter by Gus C. Garcia to the Honorable Jack Ross, Board of Pardons and Paroles in Austin, Texas. Garcia expresses his disappointment over the case of Pete Hernandez and that Hernandez is still confined in prison. He is following up on Hernandez, who helped the Hispanic community bring a landmark case to court. February 12, 1960. Honorable Jack Ross, Board of Pardons and Paroles, Austin, Texas. Dear Jack, it is with much chagrin that I learned a couple of days ago that Pete Hernandez, number 136125, who served as our guinea pig for our appeal to the United States Supreme Court on the question of jury discrimination, is still confined in the penitentiary. Pete has been confined continuously since August 1951. At the time that he was sentenced in December 1955, to 20 years after his first case was reversed, he was given credit for 62 months good time. What his record has been since that time, I do not know, but I do know that he's now located at Harlem State Prison Farm. I shall be grateful if you could garner such information as you may be able to get on such short notice, and let me know by next week, by long distance collect, when it would be convenient for you to discuss this matter with me personally in Austin. I really...
Garcia goes on to really plead that this is really important to him. He's willing to make that call, saying that Hernandez, he put his life on the line for all of Hispanic civil rights, and we owe this young man something. What is going on here? So again, in all of it, he keeps pushing through and pushing through. And I think that just is a testament to who he was as a person. And somebody asked,
I feel conscience-stricken, Jack.
Somebody asked the question is, how long was it that this court takes place? So this is going to be in the early 50s, and Garcia is going to be one of the lead attorneys both for Delgado versus Bastrop and for Hernandez versus Texas. So at this point, even as a young man, he's one of the leading civil rights attorneys in the U.S. Thank you for that question, Andrew. Really quick, because I am running out of time, and I promised Annie I would finish on time today. Some other organizations that are going to pop up in the 60s and maybe are civil rights organizations that you've not heard about, but they have that Tejano origin and that spur on more of these national movements. One of them is MAYO, the Mexican American Youth Organization, founded in San Antonio. One of its founders, Jose Angel Gutierrez, is going to be that leader. And this is really that academic, is on campuses fighting for that equality for Tejano students, Mexican American students with that as well. And this is going to really drive that change and bringing up those social economic conditions among Hispanics and what that means and as well. In 1968, the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund, this is so critical as well, is again founded in Texas, is putting funding, all the civil rights stuff and all these court cases, it takes money, it takes attorneys, it takes time, and building a whole defense based on that and a fund based on that becomes really critical. And that makes the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund so important to not just put yourself out there, but to actually build a base that the funding is there to continue to fight for those civil rights. Another one, we talked about voting rights, right? Although Hispanics and Tejanos get voting rights, those are frequently diminished. And so the Southwest voter registration education, again founded in Texas, empowered Tejanos especially to increase participation in the democratic process. Again, it's that concept of that you're a Texan and a Tejano. This is one thing. As a Tejano, you need to vote because you're Texan as well. It is one and the same. You're part of this. You're part of this democratic process. You need to register. You need to be part of this. Your vote matters. And this brings a conversation all the way today, right? This fight for voting rights, registration, immigration, all these conversations that are still going on. Just over a year ago, one of the leading Tejana civil rights fighters and cultural fighters passed away in our community, and that is Anita Martinez. She was one of the families that grew up in what was considered Little Mexico. She from a very poor family. She worked after school to support her family, got married, and she believed education was the key for success. And so even after marrying, she dedicated her life to volunteering in Dallas schools and community organizations, all focused on social justice for Tejanos and what that meant here in Dallas, and increase opportunity for Tejano children, make those opportunities available. And I think the biggest difference that she made is in '69, she was the first Hispanic on the Dallas City Council. And she brought that Hispanic voice to Dallas politically on the council, making her voice heard, making sure, again, looking at strengthening the community, providing protections, covering their rights as well on a very local level. And it just makes you recognize this, our role. It doesn't have to be national. We don't all have to be Gus Garcias, but we can make a difference right here in our community. She was also an immense advocate for Tejano culture. If you have never participated or visited the Anita N Martinez Ballet Folklorico, I really encourage it. This folklorico was established by Martinez to help children develop a pride in Tejano culture. Again, she stressed it so many times. There's so many audio clips of her stressing this, that you can be Texan and Tejano at the same time. And so I want to wrap up tonight before I go my questions with a little clip from Martinez.
I was sworn into office on Cinco de Mayo. I knew that West Dallas was a very underserved. I mean, they still had outdoor toilets, no street lights, no curbed and gutters, and I knew that if I wanted my city, if I wanted my kids to grow in a strong community, that we had to help the weakest link get strong, and that was West Dallas. So then I went for an expansion of the rec center from 14,000 square feet to 38,000 square feet, the only rec center with a second floor, because I wanted to have the ballet folklorico. I was sworn.
And I just thank you for somebody for reminding me. I was confusing my favorite Upstanders here. We had just a different Upstander that passed away this spring, but Anita Martinez is still alive. I was just looking up how old she was. I believe she is 96. I was just trying to find her age. Yep, 96, born in 1925, right there. And somebody sharing that they danced for the Anita Martinez Dance Company in the 90s, and saying being 13, running around the Majestic Theater were some of the best times of my life. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, I'm gonna see if we just want to do a few more questions. If anybody wants to ask some questions or share something. So I'm going to stop my PowerPoint right here. Somebody said in my history class, I'm doing a presentation on Gus Garcia. Any other interesting facts or words of wisdom to share? There's so much. He is, one of those Upstanders again that I'm very passionate about. I do know this little fact that well, it's maybe not a fact, but it's a rumor that the actress Eva Longoria is working on a movie on his life. So that might be something to dig in, is his research. That maybe the film has done on that, or that rumor is truth, or that was as well. Sierra said, did you know that Gus Garcia was allowed an extra 14 minutes? Yes, that's what I mentioned. Is very extraordinary, had not happened at that point at the Supreme Court. And that just speaks to the power of Gus Garcia right there as well. Okay, I thank everybody for your questions. I'm sorry for going 5 minutes over. I really appreciate you connecting with us. And I'm going to turn it back to Amy.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. I think, given, as you said, we could spend an entire school semester on this, I think an extra 5 minutes is well deserved. So thank you again for sharing all this information. If you have not yet been to the museum, we really encourage you to come visit us. You can see many of the Upstanders featured tonight, as well as many others. Hear some of their testimony, or someone reading for them. So please do come see us, and we look forward to seeing you at the next program. Everyone have a great rest of your evening. Good night.